all Northern Ireland's people, respect the fact that Northern Ireland is an integral part of the customs territory of the UK, and respect the need to bear as lightly as possible on the everyday life of Northern Ireland. Although there will be some new administrative requirements in the protocol, these electronic processes will be streamlined and simplified to the maximum extent. And as the European Commissioner's own negotiator, Michel Barnier, has spelled out, the protocol's procedures must be as easy as possible and not too burdensome, in particular for smaller businesses. As is so often the case, but not always, Monsieur Barnier is right. The economy of Northern Ireland is heavily dependent on small and medium-sized enterprises. Subjecting traders to unnecessary and disproportionate burdens, particularly as we wrestle with the economic consequences of COVID-19, would not serve the interests of the people of Northern Ireland for whom the protocol was designed. And the protocol text itself is explicit that implementation should impact as little as possible on the everyday life of communities. So in that context, it's important for us all to recall that the clear majority of Northern Ireland's trade is with the rest of the United Kingdom. So safeguarding the free flow of goods within the UK's internal market is of critical importance to Northern Ireland's economy and people. Today, we're publishing a command paper that outlines how the protocol can be implemented in a way that would protect the interests of the people and economy of Northern Ireland, ensure the effective working of the UK's internal market, and also provide appropriate protection for the EU single market, as well as upholding the rights of all Northern Ireland's citizens. Now, delivering on these proposals will require close working with the Northern Ireland Executive, underscoring once again the significance of the restoration of the Stormont institutions in January. And I'd like to put on record my gratitude for the constructive approach which has been shown by Northern Ireland politicians, including the First Minister and Deputy First Minister, as well as honourable members from across this House. There are 4 steps we'll take to ensure the protocol is implemented effectively. First, we will deliver unfettered access for NI producers to the whole of the UK market. Northern to Great Britain goods movements should take place as they do now. There should not be export declarations or any other processes as goods leave NI for GB, and we will deliver on unfettered access for Northern Ireland goods through legislation by the end of this year. Second, we'll ensure that there are no tariffs on goods remaining within the UK customs territory. In order to ensure that internal UK trade qualifies for tariff-free status, there will need to be declarations on goods as they move from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. But these systems will be electronic and administered by UK authorities. It will be for our authorities to determine any processes that are required, using the latest technology, risk and compliance techniques to keep these to an absolute minimum. And that will also allow us to deliver on our third key proposal, which is that implementation of the protocol will not involve new customs infrastructure. We acknowledge, however, as we've always done, that on agri-food and live animal movements, it makes sense to protect supply chains and the disease-free status of the island of Ireland, as has been the case since the 19th century. That will mean some expansion of existing infrastructure to provide for some additional new processes for the agriculture and food sector, but these processes will build on what already happens at ports like Larne and Belfast, and we'll work with the EU to keep these checks to a minimum, reflecting the high standards we see right across the UK. There is no such case, however, for new customs infrastructure, and as such, there will not be any. Fourth, we will guarantee that Northern Ireland businesses will benefit from the lower tariffs that we deliver through new free trade agreements with third countries. This ensures that Northern Ireland businesses will be able to enjoy the full benefits of the unique access that they have to the UK and EU markets. These 4 commitments will ensure that as we implement the protocol, that we give full effect to the requirements in its text to recognise Northern Ireland's place in the UK and in its customs territory. And as we take the work of implementation forward, we'll continue to work closely with the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister, with Northern Ireland MPs from across parties and also the business, community and farming groups that have provided such valuable feedback for our approach. And of course, we've already guaranteed in the New Decade New Approach deal that the Northern Ireland Executive has a seat at the table in any meeting where Northern Ireland is being discussed and the Irish Government is present. Alongside that, there'll be a new business engagement forum to exchange proposals, concerns and feedback from across the community on how best to maximise the free flow of trade. And we will ensure that those discussions sit at the heart of our thinking. Mr. Speaker, we recognise that there will be a wide range of voices and responses to our command paper. We will listen to these respectfully while we continue to put our own case with conviction at the Joint Committee. Our approach will, of course, continue to be informed by extensive engagement with businesses, politicians and individuals right across communities in Northern Ireland. We stand ready to work with the EU in a spirit of collaboration and cooperation so that a positive new chapter can open for Northern Ireland and its people in every community. And it's in that spirit that I commend this statement to the House.
Thank you. We now call Rachel Reeves, who has 4 minutes. Rachel Reeves.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Minister for advance sight of his statement and the command paper. During the election campaign, the Prime Minister told Northern Irish businesses that if they are asked to fill in any extra paperwork, then they should call him personally, and I quote, "I will direct them to throw that form in the bin." On the 22nd of January, when the Prime Minister was asked in this House whether this meant unfettered access between Great Britain and Northern Ireland and Northern Ireland and Great Britain, he said, and I quote again, emphatically yes. But for the first time today, on page 7 of the command document published, it says that there will be some new administrative requirements. Checks on animals and agri-food will be a significant escalation of what currently takes place and will mean a border management system that is quite new in terms of its scope and scale. In the document published today, it says that we will need to expand some existing entry points to provide for proportionate additional controls. So can the Minister confirm what proportion of animal and agri-food products he expects will require additional physical checks? Will these checks take place at ports in Northern Ireland? Physical checks require a product to be taken off the lorry, opened, inspected, tested and quarantined until deemed legitimate. That's quite a burden. Can the Minister confirm that there will be physical checks, or indeed that there definitely won't be physical checks? I quote from the document published today, some new administrative processes for traders, including electronic import declarations requirements and safety and security information for goods entering Northern Ireland from the rest of the UK apply. This is no small matter, Madam Deputy Speaker. Import declarations can require 40 separate data points, and the HMRC have estimated that each declaration for shipment could cost between £14 and £56. Can the Minister confirm the number of checks and the costs of those checks to businesses? For the 1.8 million goods vehicles that crossed from Great Britain into Northern Ireland last year, that certainly adds up. On the issue of tariffs, the government has previously promised that no tariffs on goods traded either way between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And indeed, they've said no tariffs, fees or charges or quantitative restrictions. But for the first time today, the government has accepted that there will be tariffs on goods entering Northern Ireland. It says in the command document that goods ultimately entering Ireland will face tariffs, or goods that are clear risk of doing so will face tariffs. So can the Minister say who will be levying or administering those tariffs? What does clear risk mean, and who will define it? Could we have a situation of tariffs applied and later reimbursed? And if so, what would the timetable for that be? In the command document, it says, we will produce full guidance to business and third parties before the end of the transition period. Madam Deputy Speaker, it doesn't give much time for businesses to prepare for what could be quite profound changes. The Minister says that goods moving from Great Britain to Northern Ireland don't need to be checked because the majority remain in the UK. And this is a hugely important point. Indeed, 70% of goods that flow from Great Britain to Northern Ireland are destined for the high street. I hope a way can be found forward so that those goods can move freely. But the command paper accepts some new administrative processes for traders, including electronic import declaration requirements and safety and security information for goods entering Northern Ireland from the rest of the UK apply. So can the Minister confirm that this will include rules of origin checks, safety and security checks and import declarations? And if so, where and how will those checks take place? There is no mention in the document published today of a trusted trader scheme that is surely essential for ensuring the free flow of goods without tariffs from Great Britain into Northern Ireland, which we all want to see. To finish, Madam Deputy Speaker, we welcome the statement today, but it does expose the broken promises made by the Prime Minister. Today, there has been admission for the first time that there will be additional checks, that there will be tariffs on goods at risk of entering the single market. Even now, many fear that the government are not willing to admit the full extent of those. We have 7 months to get this right, and we must.
Minister Michael Gove.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful for the welcome that the Honourable Lady gives to the approach that we are taking. And grateful also for her commitment and her party's commitment to support the implementation of the protocol in a way which safeguards the gains of the Good Friday Agreement. She makes the point that there will inevitably be, as a result of the implementation of the protocol, checks on not just animals but also agri-food products. But as she's aware, those checks already exist for live animals. It is the case already in the Port of Larne and the Port of Belfast that checks are carried out. So we will, of course, exercise any new checks on agri-food products in a proportionate way. But by doing so, we imagine that the proportion of goods that will need to be checked will be very minimal. And of course, because of the very, very high standards that we will maintain in this country on SPS matters, people can have absolute confidence that the quality of goods which is being placed on the Northern Ireland market is of the highest level. She also asked about the cost of these checks. We'll be working with HMRC in order to ensure that these checks are as light touch as possible and integrated, for example, into the operation of VAT returns and other processes with which businesses are already familiar. And we're confident that Northern Ireland's businesses and indeed HMRC can work collaboratively in the course of the remaining 7 months before the transition period ends in order to have a system that is operational, light touch and effective and unobtrusive. She also makes the point about tariffs. Well, of course, tariffs would only apply in the case of there being no zero tariff, zero quota free trade agreement with the European Union. The European Union is committed in the political declaration to securing such a zero tariff, zero quota arrangement, in which case the provisions in the protocol for the remittance of tariffs would not be required. But as is made clear in paragraph 27, to which I refer the Honourable Lady, if it were the case that there were no agreement and that tariffs did have to be levied, the government would make full use of the provisions in the protocol to give us the powers to waive and or reimburse tariffs on goods moving from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, even where they are classified as at risk of entering the EU market. So there would be no additional costs for business. The approach that we've taken, as the Honourable Lady knows, is designed to ensure the maximum level of security for the businesses of Northern Ireland. And if the protocol is implemented in line with our approach, that means they will have unfettered access to the rest of the UK's internal market and also free access to the EU's single market. That is a great prize and one that I believe all businesses in Northern Ireland would want us to help them to grasp.
I call Mrs. Theresa May.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for his statement. Will my right honourable friend confirm that as from the 1st of January 2021, the Northern Ireland, i.e. a part of the United Kingdom, will be required to abide by EU regulations on certain goods until at least 2024 and potentially indefinitely?
Minister Gove.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for her question, and let me take this opportunity to pay tribute to her work during her time as Prime Minister in order to ensure that the position of Northern Ireland could be secured within the United Kingdom, even as we left the European Union. And it is the case that there will be EU regulations, aspects of the acquis, that will apply in Northern Ireland to 2024. But of course, she draws attention to a very important point, which is that if the workings of the protocol are viewed by the people and the parties of Northern Ireland as onerous, too much, intrusive and unacceptable, then they have the opportunity to vote them down in 2024, which is why it is so important that we design an approach which can continue to command consent.
I call Pete Wishart, who has 90 seconds.
90 seconds. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. What we seem to be presented with today is another episode of Schrodinger's border, one that's both there but not quite there, and it's all dependent on what side of the EU negotiations you happen to be on. UK ministers have repeatedly said that there'd be no border or any checks down the Irish Sea. We now know that's not exactly the case, and we heard in the last response there. From the very beginning, the possibility of this was crystal clear, given what's in the withdrawal agreement and the need for a level playing field between the EU and Northern Ireland. We all know that there will be customs checks between the rest of the UK and Northern Ireland. Why doesn't this UK government just acknowledge that fact? And the EU have said that there must be the introduction of customs procedures and formalities in Northern Ireland for all goods traded between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. Madam Deputy Speaker, there's been no discussions about this for the Scottish Government, even though we'll be placed at a competitive disadvantage to Northern Ireland because of these arrangements. And we would give our national right hand to have the arrangements and the competitive advantage that Northern Ireland will have. So why can't we get some of these if Northern Ireland doesn't want it? Madam Deputy Speaker, these negotiations need skill and guile and dexterity. I think what we've seen again today is that we've got a government who just singularly are not up to it.
Minister Gove.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Skill, guile and dexterity are all virtues that we associate with the honourable gentleman. So if he wants to join the government negotiating team, I'd be more than welcome to have him on. Board. But the point about the requirement for customs infrastructure and customs checks is a misunderstanding on his part. We want to ensure, as he recognises in his question, that the people and the businesses of Northern Ireland have an opportunity to benefit both from their secure position within the United Kingdom and access to the EU market. And Northern Ireland's history, its traditions and its geography put it in a unique position. But the proposal that we put forward today means there is no need for new customs infrastructure, and at the same time, the Northern Ireland stays within the customs territory of the United Kingdom. I know that he's an enthusiast for border posts, and he'd want to have them not just in Belfast, but at Berwick. But my own view is that our United Kingdom is better off without them.
I call Simon Hall.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. If we're correct to presume that any paperwork will be actually digital, can my right honourable friend assure me that there will be compatibility between the IT systems of HMRC and the European Union in order to ensure that that system can work swiftly and smoothly? And he mentioned in his statement consultation, we've been hearing in the Select Committee inquiry on this important issue, a precious little, I should say, engagement with the business community by his department. Can I urge him to sharpen his pencil and engage with the community to make sure that it is understood, and also that his department understands that most businesses are mostly focused on dealing with COVID and trying to survive?
We have very little time, so I would encourage honourable and right honourable members to have short questions and obviously short answers as well. Minister Gove.
We will, of course, work to make sure that IT systems are efficient and compatible. We will, of course, consult with business, and my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, has a business roundtable this afternoon. Engagement with Northern Ireland's citizens and its many small and medium-sized enterprises is critical to making everything work.
I call Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. We all hope there will be a trade agreement with the EU, but if there isn't, how will the government stop goods such as cars made in the EU, which in those circumstances would attract a 10% tariff, from entering Great Britain via Northern Ireland tariff-free? The right honourable gentleman has just told the House that goods would have unfettered access moving from Northern Ireland to GB, or would there in fact have to be checks if people tried to do that?
Minister Gove.
We'll have market surveillance, and if people try to break the law, they'll face the consequences.
William Ragg.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The way in which the UK and EU seeks to address, I quote, Ireland's unique geographic situation as part of the negotiations could have constitutional and practical implications for Northern Ireland's status within the UK. So could my right honourable friend reassure me that he can square that circle, or is it on the current trajectory of talks an impossible objective?
Minister Gove.
That circle can be squared using an exercise of what I believe in the EU is known as variable geometry. But the truth, of course, is that Northern Ireland's position within the United Kingdom is constitutionally secure and unchanged.
I call Sir Geoffrey Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State will be aware that we voted against the withdrawal agreement because of the Northern Ireland Protocol, but we welcome the clarity that this statement brings today, that Northern Ireland will remain part of the UK customs territory, that there will be no new customs infrastructure, that there will be no tariffs on goods flowing between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and that Northern Ireland businesses will have unfettered access to the Great Britain market. Will the Secretary of State and his team continue to work with us and with the business community in Northern Ireland to ensure that these matters are taken forward and that Northern Ireland remains an integral part of the UK single market?
Minister Gove.
I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman for his question, and yes, we absolutely will. Our whole approach is making sure that the protocol, which of course was unwelcome in many quarters in Northern Ireland, now that it is law, is implemented, but implemented in a way that goes with the grain of Northern Ireland opinion and reflects the interests of Northern Ireland's peoples, which he so eloquently defends.
I call Owen Paterson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome my Right Honourable friend's statement confirming Northern Ireland's continued position as an integral part of the United Kingdom and customs territory, and also respecting that he will deliver what apparently are contradictory demands of the protocol, which fundamentally require respect of the single market and not damage its integrity. And it seems to me that the Alternative Arrangements Commission came up with very sensible suggestions which would conform to all this, would square the circle, and that would be enhanced authorised economic operators. And I wonder if my right honourable friend could work with some leading companies who ship goods across the Irish Sea in both directions, set up some trials rapidly over the next few weeks, so that by the autumn, whether we have a free trade agreement or not, we are in a position to present the European Union with a practical solution to continued unfettered trade across the Irish Sea in both directions.
My right honourable friend, who is a brilliant Northern Ireland secretary as well as a brilliant DEFRA secretary, is absolutely right. Building up the capacity of authorised economic operators and other trusted traders can make the protocol and the economy of Northern Ireland work better.
Claire Hannah.
Madam Speaker, the member has finally confirmed that there will be a large increase in the amount of red tape and therefore the costs to consumers and businesses in Northern Ireland. And while I welcome latterly from the member language around commitment to the Good Friday Agreement, I don't believe that the rhetoric within the statement reflects the uniqueness of the place here. Would the member accept that every divergence and every further political choice that his government chooses to make in pursuit of castles in the air trade deals with the United States increases the level of checks required in the Irish Sea, and that in fact the only way to ensure that there aren't fettering and barriers to trade is to soften Brexit?
Minister Gove.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady. No, I don't accept that. I think that the primacy of the interests of Northern Ireland's businesses and indeed the primacy of Northern Ireland's people is at the heart of our approach towards implementing the protocol. The Good Friday Agreement depends on consent across Northern Ireland from unionist, from nationalist and from non-aligned individuals, and we want to make sure that their interests come first through the light touch approach that we propose.
Julian Smith.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I do welcome the command paper, but we do now, as my right honourable friend has said, need to quickly reassure the unionist grassroots on their fears as to the exact nature of the processes referred to, and to those nationalists and unaligned voters who have serious concerns about leaving the EU. Above all, on this issue of business, I'm not sure we've got 7 months. I mean, businesses and I, as in the rest of the UK, have got their backs against the wall with COVID. Please, 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 will he use all of his energy to work with them on exactly what they will need and a constructive approach with the EU to getting a practical solution?
Minister Gove.
Yes, I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend. We wouldn't have been able to make progress in this way if it had not been for him and the New Decade, New Approach document that he was responsible for bringing to life in the Northern Ireland Executive, which he helped restore. So I'm very grateful to him, and he's absolutely right. We've got to get cracking, which is why I hope that we'll have positive engagement from the EU, as well as the positive engagement that we're going to have with Northern Ireland's businesses.
Kirsten Oswald.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last November, the Prime Minister told Northern Irish business leaders there'll be no forms, no checks, no barriers of any kind, and he said he would recommend any such forms be put in the bin. But of course, the Secretary of State's paper today does refer to new administrative processes, and it nods the potential for these to be disproportionately burdensome. That being the case, does he not appreciate the needs to try for clarity on what his government actually means and how it might actually be implemented is yet another reason why we must have an extension to the transition period.
Minister Gove.
I don't think we need an extension to make these processes work. We just need goodwill on all sides.
Dr. Andrew Morrison.
The arrangements my right honourable friend has described are potentially good news for businesses and consumers in Northern Ireland, a great opportunity. But can I press him on what he describes as very minimal checks? Does he mean the 4% of imports that are currently checked coming into the United Kingdom and the 1% that are physically checked? Does he mean more or less than that, since clearly the European Union thinks substantial checks will be required, presumably exceeding those levels, because it's setting up a bureaucracy in Belfast to cope with it?
Minister Gove.
My right honourable friend makes a very good point about the number of checks that are currently required as goods move into the United Kingdom, often from jurisdictions that don't have such high SPS standards as we uphold. We will continue to have high SPS standards, so the proportion of physical checks required is almost certain to be fewer than are currently required for goods coming from outside.
Sammy Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The withdrawal agreement and its separate arrangements for Northern Ireland will always be offensive to unionists, regardless of what alliances the government tries to make. But will he give us an assurance that at least any of the arrangements in this will be totally in the control of the UK government and not the EU, and that the government will resist all attempts by the EU and the European Court of Justice to dictate how business regulations and human rights laws should be applied in Northern Ireland?
Minister Gove.
The Honourable Gentleman makes a very good point, and it is the case that it's for the UK government to be responsible for the application and the delivery of the protocol. We are one customs territory, we are one United Kingdom, and it's in that spirit that we've said to the EU that we don't think it's a good idea for them to establish a new mission in Belfast. Because, again, as the Honourable Gentleman knows, that will be seen by many in Northern Ireland as unnecessary and not in keeping with the spirit of the Belfast Agreement.
Peter Bone.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. When I was in business in the 1990s, exporting all over the world, I just wanted to know what the rules were, then I would comply with them, and then I'd sell my goods. Could the Secretary of State assure the House that the rules will be made available to business in Northern Ireland at the earliest possible opportunity, and then they'll get on with doing business?
Minister Gove.
Yes, we will apply a principle which I know he will recognise, which is KISS. Keep it simple, Sonny.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Twice this year I've come to Northern Ireland oral questions and asked both the Minister and the Secretary for State for Northern Ireland, will there be checks? The same question. Twice I was told no, but now the Minister today is saying yes, there will be checks in some form. So I would ask, will his colleagues come to the House to correct the record and also to detail their assessment of the financial impact such checks are likely to have on the Northern Ireland economy?
Minister Gove.
There won't be any customs infrastructure. There won't be, save in the specific example of agri-foods and products of animal origin, the requirement for physical checks of the kind about which I believe she has expressed concern. It will be the case that we will implement these principles in a way that has the lightest possible touch so that Northern Ireland's businesses wrestling with COVID-19 have the brightest possible future.
Catherine West.
Speaker, the Prime Minister's advice to Northern Ireland when he last visited was to throw any border forms in the bin. Does this remain the government's advice, and does this apply in a no-deal Brexit scenario?
Minister Gove.
Well, the whole point of the protocol is that it's part of the withdrawal agreement. We can't have a no-deal scenario because the withdrawal agreement is a deal. But I, in a spirit of generosity, know that she means that if we have an Australian-style trading relationship rather than a Canadian-style, will the protocol apply? And the protocol exists for just such an eventuality. As for bins, there'll be no need for forms because it will all be done electronically.
Gavin Robinson.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and in welcoming the insertion of substantial to the test of whether goods are at risk for further transit into the European Union. Could I ask the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster to indicate how realistic he thinks it is that the Commission will agree to that insertion, and give us a progress report on the pragmatic development of what is considered to be a good at risk of further transit?
Minister Gove.
Well, the honourable gentleman knows that the majority of Northern Ireland's trade is with the UK, a smaller proportion is with the Republic of Ireland, and that the amount of produce that goes from GB through NI and into Ireland is very, very small. So we're taking a risk-based approach, and we're saying to the European Commission, we know that you want to safeguard the gains that Northern Ireland has made in the last 22 years. One of the best ways to do that is to recognise that in the same way as Chairman Mao said that the kingdom of heaven was upheld by both men and women, so the Belfast Agreement depends on the support of both nationalists and unionists.
Felicity Buchan.
Will my right honourable friend assure me that the interests of Northern Ireland will always be as important as those of the rest of the United Kingdom?
Ms Gove.
Yes, I think it was Margaret Thatcher who said that Northern Ireland was as British as Finchley, and that has always been my view. It is, of course, the case that the Belfast Agreement recognises the particular history, traditions, geography, and conflict that's existed in Northern Ireland. But the people of Northern Ireland have decided and voted consistently to remain part of the United Kingdom, and I celebrate that.
Thank you. That concludes scrutiny proceedings. I suspend the House for 5 minutes until 1:58. Order, order.